I do want to issue a trigger warning. We will be talking about things that affect the community, and that can be sensitive topics. We'll talk about depression. We'll even touch on exploitation of film workers, even sexual assault. So if that sounds like something that you're not able to handle tonight, obviously feel free to excuse yourself at any time and take care of yourself.
Let's go, our time is now. Our time is now.
I would love to welcome Sam Toddy back up here and he can introduce our guest and bring her up onto the stage as well. So please give a round of applause for Sam Toddy.
I'm going to take a moment to set the stage. Alrighty, cool. So over the past couple of years, I've been perusing Facebook and Instagram, looking at people in different tax brackets than me. And while I'm going through it, I'm noticing that a couple of things keep frequently coming up, and it's different internal issues that some of our artists have been expressing. So I thought to start off the year, it'd be a great idea to bring somebody in who may be able to help teach us some coping mechanisms for these things, and to also just sort of generally tell everyone that they're okay. At least I assume that's what she's gonna tell you guys. She might say you're screwed. But I want to introduce licensed clinical professional counselor Isabella Tambone to the stage, please.
Hello.
Well, Bella, go ahead and tell us about yourself, please.
Okay, I'm Bella. I'm a licensed therapist in Kansas City, and my film CV is that I was in a suntan lotion commercial when I was 5. So I do want to issue a trigger warning. We will be talking about things that affect the community, and that can be sensitive topics. We'll talk about depression. We'll even touch on exploitation of film workers, even sexual assault. So if that sounds like something that you're not able to handle tonight, obviously feel free to excuse yourself at any time and take care of yourself.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And thanks for coming out here. This is really exciting. The thing that she also didn't mention is she's about to become a member of the Toddy family here because she is now engaged to my cousin Caleb. All right. Well, I want to start it off. Sorry, I got my notes written down on my phone. I didn't print anything out. But I wanted to start with saying that the theme this year is taking care of our artists. And one of the things that I've noticed is we come into January, and that's usually where you start to kind of get the melancholy. I know there's a professional term for it, and I wondered if you go into detail a little bit more about that, but then also talk about some of the coping mechanisms for people who just feel like this is the most depressing time of the year. I don't even feel like going out and doing anything, let alone making our art.
Yeah, so a lot of people experience seasonal affective disorder around this time. Sad. And that is something that we kind of associate with lack of vitamin D or the sun, but it's actually a change in your circadian rhythm. So your circadian rhythm is your internal clock that tells you what time it is, essentially. And when that gets messed up, you experience things like not being able to get out of bed, not wanting to do your favorite things. Depression in general can impact your brain so much. I would encourage all of you to look up a PET scan of what someone's brain looks like when they're depressed. It's so different from someone who is not suffering from that. And so it can be really hard physically to do the things that you need to do. So the first thing that I like to kind of employ, and I'm going to throw you a lot of tips at you. I want to also make the disclaimer, I am a therapist, but I'm not your therapist, so take what I say with a grain of salt. And if you need, please seek professional help. That is not me. Well, it can be me, but it's not me right now, in this moment. But to reset your circadian rhythm, you want to do a couple of things. One of them is to go to bed and wake up at the same time every day, which is really hard and a real bummer to hear for a lot of people. But it really helps get your circadian rhythm kind of on the same schedule. Another thing that can help is being in sunlight right when you wake up. I know that's really hard right now. Doing some sort of physical activity, so a nice walk, stretching at your house, nothing that can't be done from your house, honestly. All really help with that. Those are just some like quick tips. The other thing is that when we don't want to do things, we can scale them. So like, let's say you can't get out of bed and take a shower. Can you wash your face, you know? If you can't get out of bed and brush your teeth, can you like use mouthwash? And just scaling things in general can be a really helpful tool because you're doing something and that leads to you doing other things. And that's actually like the most research-backed treatment for depression. It's called behavioral activation. And it really sucks because the one thing you don't want to do is like anything, right? So it's like a real catch-22. So that's a bummer. But if you do small things, you'll oftentimes want to do more small things. I don't know if you've ever like been doom scrolling in bed and then you get up and you do one small thing and then you're like, okay, well, I'm already up. Like, I'm ready to go for a walk. I'm ready to go run a marathon, whatever it is, you know? That's kind of the first step. And then the other thing that I think is also a real bummer because everyone tries this all the time is that you can't shame yourself into doing anything. So I've tried it. I mean, you guys have all probably tried it. If it worked, I would be out of a job, and also we would all be cured, right? So it really is helpful to know the science, and that's why I kind of like bring up the PET scans and how hard it is to get out of bed, just because it is like a physical disability to be depressed. So treating it as if you are like sick and how you would care for yourself when you're sick and treating yourself with compassion when you can't do those things is honestly like the most important step in all of that. Yeah, that's my answer.
Is there a difference between like the seasonal depression and like a more long-term thing? Like, is it something that can affect anybody who may not have a consistent depression throughout the year? Or is it just a symptom of that maybe people are just not willing to come out and tell them, like, willing to accept that they are depressed and that it's just worse right now?
So they're really interconnected. A lot of times when you go down a slope, you kind of continue to go down that slope until you do something to pull yourself back up. So sometimes it lasts for a season, sometimes it lasts for longer. A lot of times it's like kind of just jump-started with the change in season and then can go into like depression symptoms all year round if you're not like treating it. And then I was going to say something else and I forgot.
That's okay, it might come back to you. But I want to kind of switch topics a little bit and move on to something that I know I've struggled with, and I'm sure some other people have here, which is imposter syndrome and feeling that you're just, maybe you're not supposed to be an artist, or maybe you're not supposed to be a filmmaker, and that has stopped me from wanting to get up and like go to set in the morning or something like that, where I'm like, actually, I'm not even supposed to be here. I don't know why everybody's showing up for this, but I know that's wrong, and that's not actually true. But like, how do people deal with that, even though like it doesn't stop you from not wanting to get up, even if you know that's not true?
Yeah, I think that imposter syndrome is just a part of being alive. Because you grow up and then you realize that adults have no idea what they're doing and they never have. And I think that's like a real big shock. Everyone's kind of just like making it up as they go. So absolutely, that's something that I see a lot of. And honestly, two things really help with this. One is knowing that everyone is thinking that. No one thinks that they belong there because everyone is truly making it up as they go. And then recognizing what is irrational. You know, would you think this about someone else, one of your friends who is probably in a very similar situation to you? Would you be having these same thoughts? And if you're not, if you wouldn't, then that's probably an irrational thought. And so we can notice that that's there and also still do what we need to do. And that's the other thing, is kind of exposure. So like getting out there, doing it anyways. There's like this little clip of this girl who's riding a skateboard, and her dad is like, "What do we do when we're scared?" And he's like, and she says, "Do it scared." And I think that's so cute, and I agree.
That's awesome. Thank you. So filmmaking is a unique kind of art form because it's not something you can do by yourself. And that's one of the things I love the most about it, is how social it is, and that a community comes together, and then at the end of the thing, you have this cool thing that you can show people. But something that a lot of people suffer with is social anxiety, and that stops them from maybe wanting to ask if they can be on a team for one of our competitions, or thinking that they can't actually step up and be a director on something, or worse, if an actor has social anxiety and doesn't want to get in the scene with everybody else. What are some ways that we can cope with that?
Yeah, so honestly, I feel that it's pretty similar to imposter syndrome, and that it's a lot of times these irrational thoughts. A lot of times you can even point out like the I am statements that are holding you back. So like, I am a burden, I am annoying, I am, no one likes me, right? Might be another one. And one is kind of thinking again, if my friend were saying this to me, how would I respond? Would I be responding in the same way as I'm responding to myself? Am I being kind to myself when I'm thinking these things? Probably not. But another great way to help with that is by asking the people closest to you, like, am I a burden? You know, and they're probably gonna give you the correct answer, right? Unless you really are a burden, in which case I'm so sorry. That won't work if you're really annoying. But most likely it's just in your head, right? And getting reassurance from your friends is something that can really help. And I think a lot of us feel that we should be like very independent and be like working through all this stuff on our own. But like leaning on each other and asking for that from our friends and like receiving comfort and care from people is so incredibly powerful when it comes to especially social anxiety. And as far as like even stopping yourself from doing that, I want to reference, once again, the girl on the skateboard and Do It Scared. In that, like, a lot of times when we're thinking about anxiety, we're thinking about, like, exposure in a compassionate way, right? Not in the shame way that I said earlier, because that doesn't work. But just going to that one thing, you know? Not pushing it, but even scaling it a little bit. Like, just getting out there, showing your brain that you're actually not being hunted by wolves when you're there, right? Because that's a lot of times what our brains think when we're having anxiety, is that we're like immediately going to die. And then when you don't immediately die, that's really great feedback for your brain. And if you immediately die, I'm so sorry also. That also won't work, but.
What about for coping with when you're actually having an anxiety attack, especially in public where it can be embarrassing and you're not sure how to ask for help, and all of a sudden you're in the middle of something and you're freezing and you want to be able to tell your friends, like, I just need to step away for a second, but your body's just not letting you do it, so you like turn away, or like how do you communicate that to other people in a way that they can understand, but also like be able to shake yourself out of it?
Yeah, so anxiety attacks is like a pretty broad thing. So when I think about on a more severe level, it feels like you're dying. It feels like you're having a heart attack if you call 911, right? And in that situation, that would be a very different thing than like getting yourself out of it, right? What we know about anxiety attacks is they last about 15 to 30 minutes. So we know that there's an end. And that can be really helpful to the person having a panic attack in the moment, because it genuinely feels like it's going to go on forever, and it also is going to kill you. And so knowing what is going on is a really big part of getting through it. The other things that are really helpful, I can actually teach you a couple things to slow your heart rate down if you want. I don't know if you want me to go like that in depth with it.
I would love that. That'd be amazing.
Okay, so what we want to do is like stimulate your vagus nerve, which is, I don't really know how it works, that's what it's called. But one of them is called the Valsalva maneuver. And you essentially breathe out of your mouth like you're breathing out of a straw, and you bear down like you have to poop. So like, I'm not going to demonstrate that, but you get they will do, if you were to call 911, that's what they would do with you. And they do that for like different heart issues too. Another thing would be, have you guys heard of Trendelenburg? It's like where you go upside down and it fixes your heart rate. You can kind of recreate that by putting your feet up against a wall. If you're in public, that might be really hard. So what I suggest for that would be breathing in and then breathing out for longer than you breathed in. That automatically slows your heart rate down. If you can get to a bathroom, putting cold water on your neck will stimulate your diver's reflex. Technically, you're supposed to dunk your whole head, also can be kind of hard and unpleasant. So I won't suggest that either. But all those things like physically slow your heart rate down, which can help with a panic attack. The other thing too is that when you're experiencing physical symptoms, it can be very like scary and you want it to go away. But the more we think about wanting it to go away, oftentimes the more you're gonna have them. There was this experiment where they had participants not think about a white bear during the experiment, and that's all they could think about, right? And so if you just kind of let it happen also, like know that it's going to be over in 15 to 30 minutes, like give yourself, once again, compassion, that's like the biggest thing. And sometimes we don't tell our friends or feel like we have to stuff it down really quickly, and that makes it so that we like maybe aren't able to communicate with them. Maybe we do something weird, you know, I'm just kidding. But it's really helpful just to kind of like know what's going on in your body. You can do some of those physical things to help slow down your heart rate, but also just being kind to yourself while it's happening, because that is just like a very human experience, and you're not gonna make it go by faster by like willing it away. And then the last thing would be grounding. So that would be connecting to like something physical, because you're really in your head. Once again, you think you're gonna die. So that will look like connecting to sensory experiences. So a lot of times you hear like 5 things you can see, you can name that, 4 things you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. That's a lot to remember, so I never do that, but I like to just think like, okay, I can feel my feet on the floor. I can feel where they're touching on the floor. I can feel where my butt is on this seat. I can feel where my elbow's touching this table. You know, like if you're just connecting to your physical body, that can help kind of pull you out of it too.
Fair enough. What about people on the outside looking into when somebody's having an attack? I know for me, I struggle to understand what's going on if I see, like I don't even recognize that something is happening to somebody. And then by the time I do, maybe I thought that they were just being disagreeable, and then it turns out there was actually something that they couldn't control. It wasn't them trying to be hostile. What are some signs that we can look for, or ways that we can just learn to help our friends or family or significant others or anything like that? Because I know that's just something that I'm blind to half the time.
That's a hard one, because a lot of times panic attacks look like you're having a major medical event, and so I think it would be hard for you to be like, it's okay, you're just having a panic attack if someone's telling you they're having a heart attack, right? That's probably not what you should do. You should probably call 911. But as far as if you just see someone kind of freeze up, it would really depend on the person. Some people like to be left alone, some people like comfort, and I think maybe establishing with your friends beforehand or talking about it when there's not an event happening might be more helpful. So like, let's say you know that a friend is prone to panic attacks. You can ask how to best support them, and that might give you better answers than like me kind of giving you a general theme or like what to do here. Also, you could help them through like a grounding exercise as far as acknowledging and noticing it, because it does mimic a lot of other medical events. I hesitate to give like advice on knowing what that looks like.
Oh, that's fair. I just figured if there was something that we could recognize, it'd be nice to just be able to clock it, because I know that's a blind area for me where I struggle being able to see it in the moment when it's happening, and by the time I realize what's happening, it's too late, and there's nothing I can do about it, sort of thing. So
yeah, and honestly, there's not a lot you can do if someone's having a panic attack other than just like be with them. just because it does, like, we can, like, time a panic attack, you know?
Mhm.
So it just, like, comes and then it, like, goes, and it's a very physical experience.
Fair enough. Well, we've been talking a lot about internal struggles and ways that we can help ourselves. One of the unfortunate realities about not just like a local film community, but just film in general is a lot of time, because these are artists that have big hopes and dreams, it's easy for people who are in places of power to want to take advantage of them. Sometime, I know the Harvey Weinstein incidences that happened a few years ago is the main one that I think of, but also like there's been smaller scale ones in our community. How can we coach victims to handle situations like that?
Yeah, so my background is in sexual assault. That's mainly what I do now. I specialize in like EMDR, which is a type of trauma therapy.
What does that stand for?
Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Cool.
It's like hypnosis. It's not at all like hypnosis. You do it when you walk, so it's not scary. But a lot of what I work on with people who have like PTSD symptoms or have experienced that is that when something really traumatic happens to you, especially sexual assault, you blame yourself. And that is actually, when we look at like the diagnostic criteria for PTSD, blaming yourself is like something that is documented enough that it's a symptom. Because when something happens to you and it's out of your control, your brain really wants to control it, and it really wants to find out how to have it never happen again. And if that is something that you can do, your brain's gonna try and make that happen, right? Because it's really scary to think about that you not having control over that kind of situation. So a lot of times you'll think, okay, well, I shouldn't have done this, which led to this, which led to X, Y, and Z, right? And a lot of people in places of power take advantage of that and make you feel that guilt, you know? Like, oh, you did this, which led to this, and that can make victims feel even more guilt and shame for what happened. And a lot of times that shame will mean that you don't reach out to people. And that's kind of like the answer to that, is to be speaking to like your friends, speaking to your community, speaking to people you know, and continuing to speak about like behavior that feels off or gross. And that doesn't just mean sexual assault. That means just like any sort of misconduct you see in the workplace, where people in power are taking advantage of others. They will almost always try to like pin that on the victim in some way, and even like that person might not come forward because they think they've done something wrong in this situation. So they're not going to bring up like the entire event. So really checking with the people around you, because those are also like irrational thoughts that come up because you're trying to keep yourself safe. And so speaking them out loud or like sharing it with a friend, you can really gain that perspective that, okay, actually, when I just think about this in my head, I'm not getting to the bottom or the truth of it all. So really just being able to like have open communication with your friends. And you have such a great community here. Like, I feel that this would be a great place for you guys to be able to have those connections and talk about that when that happens. So that's my advice on that.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. I wanted to open it up to, got a handful of questions from the audience and maybe be willing to answer here.
Sure.
Fantastic. All righty. Does anybody have any questions?
Trail?
I'd like to piggyback off of that most recent question that Sam just asked. On the flip side of that, what would be your advice for the other people that are not actively the victims of that kind of situation, to keep an eye out for it, how to go about someone coming to you with that, and how to keep fellow cast and crew safe if there's like a toxic dynamic on set, or how other people can go about helping the people that are in those situations?
So how can other people on set go about helping other people that are in those situations if they're a witness to it?
So that's a really great question. It also has a lot of moving parts, because I guess it would depend on like what the toxic environment is. As far as sexual assault, I know that your community has a lot of resources that it has up on its website that you can direct those victims to. I think another big thing that we think is on the victim is that they have to report, and that will like stop the perpetrator from doing anything. But it's really not up to the victim to be responsible for like that person's behavior. So let's say they like don't want to like share with like your entire community, and I know that goes against what I just said, and that like you want to encourage people to talk about those things, but I don't want it to come from a place of like guilt of like this person offending other people, you know, because that is not their job. But maybe just talking about it in a way where like that, talking about it helps. And being open to that person without prying is really helpful. As far as if you see something gross on the set, it's especially helpful if like you're even in a place of power to call out those other people. In fact, that's like a really great place to advocate from because it is incredibly helpful to people you see being made uncomfortable if you point it out.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
Can you talk about MOXA and enthusiastic consent?
Yeah, so Mox is really great. I actually worked for Synergy Services for a while, which is another agency in the Kansas City area that does the same thing. So I worked in sexual abuse there. MOXA is a Kansas City-based organization that helps victims of sexual assault, and they will provide like therapy. They will also help you if you are going through like legal troubles regarding this. They can connect you to a lot of resources. They're also very like LGBTQIA affirming. And then just to also plug Synergy Services, they also are very helpful, especially I worked in the children's division, and they have so many resources or can provide those for you if you or a loved one are experiencing that. And then enthusiastic consent is a really great question because consent isn't this one-time yes, right? Enthusiastic consent cannot be coerced. So if you ask a bunch of times and they finally give in, that's not consent. It has to be freely given, it has to be ongoing, and it has to be enthusiastic. So if those things aren't present, then it isn't consent. And a lot of people think that like someone being silent or kind of just going with it is consent, when really that can be a trauma response called fawning, which is when you're like just kind of going along with it to try and get it over with. So that is something that we really like to be aware of. And consent can be revoked at any time. So let's say you're doing something, you're fine with it, you're suddenly not fine with it, your consent has revoked. That is no longer a consensual situation. And it also doesn't mean that because you've consented one time with someone or a bunch of times with someone doesn't mean that every time you're automatically consenting.
Fair enough. Anybody else? Oh, there we go. Yep, in the back.
About anxiety. See, I'm a middle-aged man now, so I didn't know that I was experiencing anxiety for ever until it started becoming on the surface. You know how it feels, you know,
Yeah.
little weird stuff. Let a doctor can't trace it, you know, and I'm like, this is spiritual, you know, so there's a lot of terms that we have to have a name for, we have to personally experience. Like, I always thought the girls were like so dramatic, that was all, I'm having anxiety, you know, I always thought they was like, you know, maybe it was the pills, maybe it was, you know what I'm saying, I'm just thinking, I've been a college guy, all right, so, you know, so, but until I experienced it, I'm like, I felt so humble and so sorry. And at the same time, I couldn't stop my own heart from beating. I was getting hot. I was like, oh my God, I hope it ain't cancer. You know, no offense, you know. But I'm getting older, so there's a lot of things that anxiety will have you thinking that you don't, it's not even there, it's not even real. And that's what makes your heart rate go up. So I had to learn that personally because it had been so deeply rooted. So do you recommend like some sort of therapy or counseling to address some roots, or to do you recommend some kind of counseling for the root
Well, I personally am a big fan of counseling. I love it. But I also wanted to speak to that because absolutely it's so physical. In fact, every emotion that you have is a physical response in your body. When you're sad, you want to cry. Your stomach might drop. When you're having anxiety, you genuinely have like physical responses as if you're going to like fight, run away, stay hidden somewhere, right? And that comes up very physically, you know? Your muscles clench. Like, those are things that are going on in real time. And a lot of times we think, oh, this is something in our head, when it's really impacting your entire body. So absolutely. I think that counseling is a great idea. I think that it sounds like you've got already a great handle on like what happens for you physically, which is a great place to start, for sure.
So, our prompt for February is monochrome magic. So, everything will be in black and white. We encourage you to play with colors and contrast and light and dark, lights and shadows. So, create a 1-minute film in black and white using light and shadow. Tell a story where color isn't needed, only contrast, composition, and creativity. And just imagine Will Carter being up here and explaining it much better than me. So, how was the submission process last time? Did it all make sense? Great. Was it easy? Cool. So, glad it's easy. You should go do it. If you have questions, email us, or just go to the website, because it's pretty great. Thanks!
All right, anybody else? I think we got time for one more here. All right.
Oftentimes, the art we produce is very demanding, and this can be due to just how hard it is to make film, how hard it is to make art in general, but also just personal investment for creating something that's personally relevant to our story. It can sometimes become obsessive and even contribute to depressive feelings or a state of depression that's developing because we're so fixated on our projects. What do you believe are some ways we could like hopefully go about our creativity with boundaries? I don't know. What do you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with the word boundaries. Also, the question was, how do you, when you're creating art, when you're creating your project, sometimes it's easy to get really, really sucked into a place where it really impacts your mental health. And how do you, go about creating art like safely, essentially? And setting boundaries around it is really important. Obviously, this is something that you're really passionate about, and it's really hard for us to separate ourselves from that. And honestly, you probably get like a lot of dopamine from that, which is like a chemical in your brain. It's something that you really enjoy. But having other things that you enjoy that aren't something that is making you money, essentially, or in the hopes of making you money, like something that you just love to do, is really helpful there. Because a lot of times when you're so passionate about your art, you're not thinking about like hobbies or just general sleep, right? So I think that it's really important for you to mindfully create like either boundaries, like this is the time that I'm going to spend doing something that I enjoy that is not my art, And for a lot of that, hobbies can be kind of a hard thing to find for yourself. A lot of times I like to think about like, what did I like to do as a kid, right? I like to play soccer. I like to be mean to my brother, right? So you might go out and be mean to people. But I really love to read, so now I think that I turn to that as an adult, or like playing sports with my friends, things like that. Also being social, like having a community that's telling you, hey, you're being really weird, you're getting really too into this. It can be really helpful too, like just even spending time with your friends in this community, not talking about all of the projects. Maybe even setting aside a time for that might be helpful.
Awesome. Well, I just want to say thank you very much for coming out and being with us for our first meeting, and hopefully being able to pass on some wisdom to everybody so the beginning of this year may not be as rough as some other years. But seriously, thank you very much. This was awesome. Give her a round of applause, everyone. Thank you, y'all.